Joining me now from the foyer of the House of Commons is the Minister of Democratic Institutions, Karina Gould. Minister, good to see you again. Thanks for spending some time with me tonight.
Glad to be here.
I want to get to the threats and where they're coming from, as outlined in the report issued today. But let me start first with the social media piece and what those companies are doing or not doing to safeguard the democratic process. You said again today you're not feeling very good about the actions of social media platforms, that you have asked to do a better job of policing their own platforms. What's happening?
Well, so I'm glad you asked that question, because we've been having conversations with the platforms for a number of months now. And on January 30th, when we made our initial announcement with regards to protecting democracy, I outlined kind of three broad areas where we'd like to see greater action. So that's with regards to transparency, authenticity, and integrity on their platforms. And I would say that the conversations that we've had have been lukewarm. They've shared a little bit about what they're doing, but I don't feel like they're taking the issue that seriously here in Canada. One of the things that I raised with them is this idea of a Canada 2 principle. So things that they're doing in other places around the world and other democracies, that they should be undertaking those same activities here in Canada. And quite frankly, it seems like they're more interested in their bottom line than protecting the integrity of our upcoming elections. And because we're a smaller market, they're not as interested in acting here in Canada.
Right. Well, it sounds like the frustration you share is being shared elsewhere. Today, the UK announced proposed new rules for social media platforms, unveiling possible fines if they fail to block illegal activity, a new watchdog office funded by the industry, senior executives, and a statutory duty, the senior executives that could be fined as well, statutory duty of care, they're calling it, to protect people who use their platforms, and perhaps even fact-checking services provided by the platforms during elections. Why don't you do that here?
Well, so I think what the UK is doing is really interesting, and it's something that we will obviously consider here. I mean, it's a white paper, so they're putting it out for consultation, to have discussion in society, but also amongst the industry. And of course, Peter, we have been having conversations with allies and partners around the world, and we're looking very closely at what different countries have done. So the UK example today is a good one. Australia recently introduced legislation to hold social media executives accountable for content that incites violent extremism. Germany has their hate speech laws. France has their fake news law. These are all things that we're looking at and trying to understand how we would respond in a Canadian context.
Right, but you've talked about how they're lukewarm to your suggestions so far. The election's 6 months away. You're not going to be able to make change, are you? I mean, so if you look at all the other things other countries are doing, say, yeah, we might be able to try that in Canada. You're not going to be able to try it before the election. So
one thing that I would like to highlight is the important work that we did in Bill C-76. So we have actually already regulated social media platforms when it comes to political advertising on their platforms. So the first one is requiring them to have an ad registry. Facebook has said they're going to do it. Google has said that they will not. They will simply just not allow political advertisements. And we're still waiting to hear from Twitter and other platforms. We've also banned them from knowingly accepting foreign funding for online advertisements.
Right, but by your own admission, you're saying you're not satisfied. That's not enough. You want them to go further. They're not going further. They show no interest in going further. What's next?
Well, so that's what we're going to be looking at. And, you know, as I've said with Canadians, I'm going to be transparent, and I am being transparent with the conversations that we're having with social media platforms. They have been saying to us, we can handle this problem. And what I'm saying right now to Canadians is I'm not sure that they're stepping up to the plate. And so we will continue to have these conversations, and I will update Canadians as to next steps. But what I think is important is that, you know, we have to look at our short-term objectives, which I believe we've dealt with in C-76, medium term in terms of laying the groundwork for how we could possibly legislate or regulate into the future. And I think what's really important, Peter, is that when we think about what legislation or regulation looks like, it needs to be forward-looking, because 10 years ago, these platforms didn't really even exist.
Sure.
Now they're so pervasive in our lives, and we need to make sure that what we're doing has long-term, forward-thinking built into it, so that we don't look at ourselves back in 10 years and say, man, we really dealt with yesterday's problems, not tomorrow's.
Okay, we might have a little bit of context for our conversation today. Facebook announced today it's banning far-right political commentator Faith Goldy. It's banning some white supremacists, crusaders, other extremist groups for violating its dangerous individuals and organizations policy. So is that an example of when they say we can take care of this ourselves? Does that give you reason to be optimistic based on what you saw from Facebook today, or not so much?
I mean, look, I think that's a good first step. I mean, one of the things that we've been asking the platforms is to enforce their own terms of service and their own community standards. And pretty much across the board, they all talk about not having content that incites violence, that is based in hatred. So these are things that, up until recently, they really haven't been acting upon. And so, we welcome, of course, Facebook's decision to not allow this kind of hatred and, discourse to be used on their platforms, and so that I think is a positive. Of course, we're looking for more, and I think one of the things that we'd like to see from platforms is them to be more transparent with Canadians about what those terms of service are, what those community standards are, and the activities that they're taking.
Okay, the report from the Communications Security Establishment today notes that more than one foreign foe has been using social media to spread false information about Canada, to try to polarize Canadians. Which countries? Who are we dealing with?
So as I've said many times in discussions with you and in the media in general, that for us what's really important is to alert Canadians to the fact that foreign adversaries are trying to use social media and other forms of online communications to divide and to create chaos and to create confusion in our democracy. It's less important the who than the what and the how. And
really?
what the CSE report does, it explains all of the different mechanisms that could be used and what Canadians should be on the lookout for.
They talk about entities that set up, maybe a sports site or an entertainment site to get started, and then they start down the road of trying to polarize people over government policies or issues. But other countries have, they've named Russia, they've named China, they've named Iran. Why not name names so that Canadians can understand who it is that's trying to interfere with our process and why?
Well, so in the report, Peter, it does, name Russia in the instance of the U.S. election. This is unclassified information that's widely known, and of course we don't hesitate to do that. But what we're saying is that, these are the things that we need to be looking at. We expect that there will be some foreign interference in our upcoming election. We don't think it will be at the same scale as what happened in the U.S. election in 2016. But what Canadians need to know is what they need to be looking for online. That's what's important, so that they can identify where misinformation is coming, or how it's happening, disinformation as well, so that they can make informed choices when they go to the ballot box. And the other thing in the CSE report today is that it provides guides for political parties, for politicians, for voters to be able to practice good cyber hygiene, which ultimately the best way that we can protect ourselves is by being informed and resilient. And
we know one of the ways in, they're finding ways in, is through political parties. Political party information is vulnerable, and yet you had the opportunity in your last piece of legislation to bring in the same privacy rules for political parties that exist for other companies, corporations in this country, but you didn't. Has that left Canadians vulnerable because of back channel use by foreign entities that can work their way through your political party list to get at the private information of Canadians?
So one of the very first things that I did when I became Minister of Democratic Institutions was ask the Communications and Security Establishment to provide information to political parties on how they can protect their data and how they can protect their IT systems. This is something that has been an ongoing relationship for over 2 years now with political parties. I think that's an important first step. I also think, Peter, though, that there are two things that I'd like to highlight. First, in C-76, we do require political parties for the first time ever to have public privacy policies that Canadians can look at that disclose how they use Canadians' information and what they do with that information. The other part that's really important is that with regards to political parties, they are different than other entities in Canada. They are different because they engage with Canadians in politics in a way that other organizations don't. Yeah. I have always said that we should have stronger privacy rules when it comes to political parties, but we need to do it in a way that enables that important engagement to happen. And so that's something that I've called on parliamentarians to look into further, and I welcome any study that they do on that so that we can move forward in a way that enables that important political engagement.
All right, Minister Karina Gould, thanks for your time this evening. Good to talk to you.
Thank you very much for having me.